All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Parrish. Going to be walking you through the electronic annual report for the 2022 build. Before we get going, Chris is going to send a message into chat just to make sure that you have the most up-to-date Zoom so you can get into our Q&A feature and some of the Q&A features of Zoom to be able to ask questions as we walk through the electronic annual report. So that message should be coming into chat and everyone in just a minute here. There it is. All right, so it is June 7th, 2023. We're here to talk about the 2022 electronic annual report. Here's our instructions for the Q&A, or for questions. So if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A portion of Zoom, not into chat. Just makes it easier for us to process them, make sure that we've supplied answers to them, and be able to provide feedback kind of after the Zoom if there's anything that we don't have time for. Just makes it easier for processing. If you are watching this just on a video recording, you can also send questions to our slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov email address, and we'll ask those questions kind of live in the sections they apply. I think that is all we have for now. Some general information on SLCP in general, if you need it. And with that, I'm going to switch over to the electronic annual report. We'll start walking through it. And we'll pause after every couple of sections. We have kind of some design breaks. So we'll talk about a few sections and pause for questions. Okay, so as a reminder, what we're showing you today is in our staging environment. We are still kind of making some last minute changes prior to releasing the ear. So not everything that you see in the electronic annual report is going to be addressed today because some of that stuff is still being addressed by our developers. But in general, it is not a giant overhaul like it was last year. It's mostly text changes to clarify things, additional functionality, and a few grids to make it more user-friendly or to be able to customize answers based on your particular situations. For our example today, we're going to use Sonoma County Waste Management Agency. So when you're first starting a report, there should be a 2022 due. That's how you access the electronic annual report. And only on that previous screen, only the jurisdictions which you report for will show up on that screen. So as you enter the electronic annual report, I'll just do some general reminders. We have the tab section up top, which matches these fields down here. You can click on either one to start it. You can start anywhere you would like. I'd recommend starting from the beginning just to make sure you answer all the questions you're required to answer in order to complete those sections. All right. So we'll start with procurement. So we're using a regional agency for this particular report because it's the most inclusive of all the different elements that may be in your electronic annual report. If you're just a single city or county, you only have kind of one row showing up in all these grids for just your jurisdiction. So just keep that in mind, that while we may walk through several jurisdictions in these examples, in your report, you should only have the one jurisdiction or however many. If you have a designated reporting entity and you're reporting for some community service districts or some special districts that provide solid waste collection, those will populate in your report as separate line items in each of these grids. So we'll start with just general reminders. So to get in each section, there's a back and edit button at the top and the bottom of the page, which I'm highlighting here in the red box. In order to access the features and enter your information, you click Edit on the page. And then for each grid in which you can enter information, edit buttons show up next to the jurisdictions. So to enter information for a particular jurisdiction, you click edit on that row item, and it opens up what we refer to as kind of the form entry screen. What you'll see here, these red asterisks are required fields, so you have to put an entry in these fields. We have some general guidance, which are these bulleted items at the top, as well as tooltips, which are in the form of these question marks next to a particular line item. So be sure to look for those because it might provide a lot of additional information for you on the purpose of a field or what type of information that field may be looking for. In this example walkthrough as well, you'll see rural exemption. I'm actually going to jump to a different spot so I can show you all of them of what may show up. So here's a good example here. So you may see rural exemption, low population waiver. Actually, I'm highlighted a little too much. Let me take that back. And so these will only show up if you have an approved rural exemption from CalRecycle or an approved low population waiver from CalRecycle. If you do not, these checkboxes will not show up in your report. We have them showing up in this walkthrough today, just so you can see where they do show up if it does apply to you. So if you do not see these, you do not have an approved waiver with CalRecycle. All right, go back to the beginning here. All right, so let me enter that screen again. So for each grid, it does require an entry in most of the fields that have those red asterisks, just to kind of talk about the logistics of the report one more time. You'll notice these additional description boxes do not have the red asterisk. This text box is to provide, it's optional, and it provides the jurisdiction opportunity to say anything else you'd like to say about what you're reporting for that particular field or in that particular form or about that particular jurisdiction. Each form has a save and cancel button that once you enter your information, you click save to save that information. If none of these apply to you and an entry is required, you would just enter 0 for any of those required fields. I'll enter a couple of numbers here. One thing we did add in this particular grid is just this note here that mulch has to be reported in tons. That's just the way the regulations were designed. There's no, mulch is not allowed to be reported in cubic yards. So we did add this note here, which was not in last year's report. So as soon as you enter the information, you click save. And if I didn't enter it correctly, see it's right here on this, it wouldn't allow me to save and you would have got an error message, which I can demonstrate in just a moment. Do it on Cotati here. So if I try to just hit save, you'll see that I get an error message that kind of looks like this. You can see it kind of bounces your screen a little bit. So if it seemed weird, and it seemed like it didn't save and close out that form entry screen, you might just need to scroll up just a little bit to see what you may have missed. All right, I'm going to cancel out of that. So here's the particular grids, checkbox sections usually require at least, oh no, what is that? Hey, Paul, I don't know what you just did, but if you could undo what you just did, I'd appreciate it to get rid of that orange box. So the checkboxes, the way these work, you just select all that apply. You can uncheck them if you like. And then down in the Shri. And then Ray or Chris, if you can get a hold of Paul, please, to get rid of that orange box, I'd appreciate it. So down in the Shri program section, you'll notice that there's a checkbox next to the program. So only the SRI programs that you have for your particular jurisdiction will populate in your report. In order to complete the page, you do have to check that box. You can see when I check that box, it creates a hyperlink here. So if you needed to change any information about that SRI program in particular, all right, so Paul, I see you don't know how it happened either, but if there's some sort of like undo button or an escape button so we can get rid of that orange box, that would probably be good because it might be a little bit confusing for people. All right, so in the, you can kind of see I clicked on that hyperlink. And so if you need to make any changes here, it's already pre-populated in the red box, not the orange box of everything you need here. So there probably no changes you need to make here, but if you do, click edit. Takes just a second since I'm in the staging environment, kind of activates these fields for you so that you can make changes if you need to, or type a note about the SRI program in particular. And as soon as you're done, you click save. And then you click back to go back to that report. Yeah, and then Chris or Ray, I don't know if we can give some general guidance to people to maybe not use that annotate button because it looks like we have quite a few people doing it now, which I think is going to lead to confusion as we walk through this. Yeah, so there we go. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. And then if it's a short, I guess one thing to point out too on these SRI programs, if you remember from last year, is if you just need to type a note about the program, you can type that note here in this field, unless you're going to go past, I think the note is right here, 2,500 characters, then you need to go into the program details like I just showed in order to enter a longer entry than 2,500 characters. If you don't, it's going to cut off that entry at 2,500 characters. So if it's just a short 1 or 2 sentences, you can do it directly within the main ear screen. You do not need to go to the program details page. Okay. And then, I closed out my my break button, but I believe this is when we're going to pause and see if there are any questions in particular about procurement or entering the ear before we move on to some of the other sections.
Yes, Andrew. So our first question is from Mark Green. I believe you began to address it, but I will go ahead and unmute Mark. If you'd like to go ahead and state your name, affiliation, ask your question, provide any clarifying information that you would like to get from Andrew for the rest of the team.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. On that first page for the procurement, I know you said that, oh, by the way, I'm City of Alameda. Sorry about that. You had noted that mulch had to be reported in tons, but there's also the asterisk for compost in yards and tons. Is there a reason we have to report both ways?
No. So the reason, based on feedback from last year, we originally had a drop down that you select tons or cubic yards. But some of the feedback we got is depending upon the vendor you get it from or source that you're getting it from, that you may get what you procured in tons and you may get it in cubic yards. So we included both so that you could report it either way because they have different conversion factors in section. Let me just look at I have a reference right here, 18993.1. in the procurement section for if compost is reported in tons or if compost is reported in cubic yards. So if you get it all in tons, you can just enter that number, and you get nothing reported to you in cubic yards, you just enter 0.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Looks like that's our last question, Andrew.
Okay. One thing I do want to point out is that we do have last year's videos, which is when we made this shift to this grid-like structure, all still posted here. And I'll just put that in the chat for everyone. So if you want a refresher, and there's a lot of good Q&A there on the shift and some additional detail that I wasn't planning on covering. I was going to try to keep it more open for the significant changes for this year and less about just the structure in general and what to report where, so that we can leave more time for specific Q&A answers. So I wasn't planning on kind of walking through each little part as much as we did last year for this year, so we can address your specific questions. So before I move on, just want to see if there's any other questions in the SLCP inbox or anywhere else.
So we do have a question from an anonymous participant, so I'll go ahead and read it. If we order mulch in cubic yards, is there a conversion equation we should use?
No, there's no conversion equation in the regulations for like an improved conversion factor. In that scenario, what I would do is in this additional description box, describe the method that you used to convert cubic yards of mulch to tons.
That's the last question in the Q&A pane. Chris, is there anything in SLCP?
Nope.
Oh, we did have one just pop in. This is just a general question. When will the 2022 EAR be available? And when will it be due?
So the 2022 EAR will open on June 15th and is due by August 1st of 2023.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to take just a minute to talk about adjusted recovered organic waste product procured grid, now that we have a full year of reporting, and this may apply for some of you. So the purpose of the adjusted recovered organic waste product procured grid is if you feel as a jurisdiction that your procurement target, which is in this upper grid here, which is based on population, is higher than the energy products that you would use, you can submit for an adjusted recovered procurement target. Just to open this up here and clarify. So if you did want to submit and have a different target, you'd say yes, which activates the grid. So for transportation fuel, electricity, and the gas used for heating application, this is referring to all transportation fuel, all electricity, and all gas used for heating applications, whether organically derived or not, in order to calculate this adjusted target. So it kind of gives some background information up top here. And so it's in this case, it'd be based on 2021. And so you could adjust your target there by entering that. So your transportation fuel would be for your fleet vehicles, police or maintenance or fire, electricity for street lights in your municipal buildings, and then same with the gas used. So you could use that to adjust your target. So if we enter some information here, just to show you what that looks like, and click save. So this is the entry for Cloverdale within the grid. And then it on those calculation factors, which are in section 189931, it can give you a new target, which you can kind of see as different than your procurement target. Since we have a whole year under our belt, some jurisdictions may choose to go that route. Okay. Edible food, I think we just added some additional kind of clarifying language in the form of tooltips here. So kind of clarifying that your total pounds of edible food, and again, just kind of emphasize that you report in pounds here, not tons. And this is for food recovery organizations and food recovery services located within your jurisdiction that have contracts or written agreements with commercial edible food generators. You do not have to limit this to just tier 1 and tier 2 if your number includes generators that do not fall into those definitions. And you can just use the additional description box to describe that situation, that what you're reporting includes all generators, not just tier 1 and tier 2, but the minimum requirement is to report on tier 1 and tier 2. For this particular grid, I wanted to show what it looks like. So kind of up there, you see that red check mark with the X through it. I want to show what a completed section looks like, so you have an indication of whether you've entered all the required fields or not. So for this one, you're gonna have to bear with me because I do have to enter it for all the jurisdictions here. And this is the only time I'll make you sit here and watch me go through this, but I just want to demonstrate what the green check mark on a section looks like. For those of you who this report may be new for you this year. All right, so this particular section only has the one grid. So there's the only required information. There may be SRI checkboxes you have to check or other checkboxes you have to check on the entire page. So as you're kind of scrolling top to bottom, just make sure you enter all the required fields. You'll get error messages if you don't. And so you can see I still have that red check mark, but as soon as I hit save on the page, it shifts to a green check mark. So that's how you know you're done with an entire section. You even get kind of that little note here that the page has been successfully saved. Just to give that indication. One thing I also didn't point out of a change from this year is we tried to make it more clear of reporting requirements that were kind of implemented in the report because of 1383 or SLCP, as we have them noted here, and those that may be combined with not only SLCP, but MCR, MORE, and 939 programs. And we just tried as much as possible to combine reporting requirements where we could. So I'll come back to procurement to demonstrate. So anything that was in here in the electronic annual report because of SLCP specifically is a green bar and also includes in parentheses SLCP. And anything that may include more than one law is in a blue bar and has combined in parentheses. So hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer on that. And then SRI programs we just left in a gray bar. And then MCR and MORE have kind of a dark gray bar, which I'll get to later to show you those. Okay. Collection systems. And we'll pause for questions right after I go through this section. Collection systems is probably where the most significant changes are to this year's year. And most of it is just based on your feedback that it just didn't contain enough functionality to report on your specific activities or how your jurisdiction operates with its collection system. So I'll walk through the whole thing because this grid is definitely the most complicated grid out of the entire report, and just recap the entire grid here. Start from the top. So you see there's a hauler name field. You do not have to use which actual hauler. This is just more of kind of identifying a hauler. So if you wanted to just say hauler 1 as an example, or residential hauler, and that's just to keep it straight, especially if you have lots of haulers in your jurisdiction. For yourself to make sure you kind of addressed all of your potential different collection systems you have operating within your jurisdiction. So again, these rural and low population waivers will only show up if you have a department approved rural exemption or low population waiver. And even with a low population waiver, if you only have certain census tracts that are waived, you may still have some reporting requirements. The way these function, just as a reminder, is for rural exemption. If you check this box, you're not required to fill out these required fields where all these red asterisks are. So if you can check the box, and in this particular grid, just to note, you can see I have my page scroll bars here and here, just to highlight those. But this grid, since it's so large, has its own scroll bar. So you may have to scroll down to the bottom of the grid. And it has its own scroll bar. The reason I'm pointing that out is because I think for most of you, you'd assume the save and cancel button should be right about there in this grid, but you have to scroll over because it's centered within the grid in order to find it. This is the only grid that's like this. The year releases on June 15th. Okay, so to take it back up to the top, I've selected rural exemption. Therefore, I'm not required to enter any of this information. And I click save, and it bypasses those required fields. I get no error messages. I'm done with that reporting. Same for low population waiver. But again, even though the function of that checkbox allows you to bypass all the reporting requirements here, it is still the jurisdiction's responsibility to report on what needs to be reported on. So if you only have certain census tracts and not your entire jurisdiction waived, you still need to report on those census tracts that are not waived, but it works the same. So check that box, click save, and I'd be done with that section. For those of you that the rural exemption or low population waiver does not apply, you do have to answer all the questions. So some new functionality that we added to this grid was hauler does not collect residential, hauler does not collect commercial. So if you have a hauler that only does one or the other, in this scenario, we'll say the hauler does not collect commercial. We can check that box and you can see it kind of grays out all of the required fields here. So then we'd enter the information for the residential only. An additional one, if you select 3 container or 3+ container, an additional question pops up for you about the organics allowed in the green container, or the gray container, excuse me. And it is a required field. You just say yes or no, depending on what the answer to that is. We'll say no in this case, since the organics are going in the green container. And then I'm going to try to break up some of the new features in chunks here because I know I didn't address all of them yet. So click save, and then that entry is done. Additionally, we added an optional field here for containers that you can specify what your collection container system is and what it consists of. It's not required to select anything here. And the tooltip here tells you how to select multiple So you can click and drag, or you can hold down Control while selecting those containers. So if you just want to provide that additional information, you can select those containers. Scroll down to that scroll bar here and select Save. You can see it kind of populates that information right here. So if you select, so the organics allowed in gray container question only comes up if you select 3 containers or 3+ containers. If you select 2 containers, do not get that question. You select 1 container, you do not get that question. And just to clarify, and I'm going to walk through an example here in just a minute of what the collection container system means, is this is referring to what your jurisdiction provides, not the number of containers that your generators may have. And I'm going to switch to an example to walk through that because I think it's a little bit easier to see in this format. Okay. So here's our fake example. So we have 1,000 total commercial generators, 100 generators having gray only, no green or blue service, 400 generators, and sorry, I didn't start with, this is an example for a 3 container collection system. 4 generators have gray and blue with no green due to not having subscribed yet. 200 generators have gray and blue with no green because they have an approved jurisdiction waiver, meaning de minimis or physical space. And 300 generators have gray, blue, and green. So in the collection container system grid, you would report that 500 generators currently have the 3 container collection system. So in the additional description box, you can provide that additional detail about the other 500, the 100 generators that have the gray only, and the 400 generators that have gray and blue and no green because they haven't subscribed yet to capture all the generators. Okay, go back to the report. Okay, I think I've touched on all of the new functionality of this grid, and I think it might actually be best, instead of going through the whole section, just to pause and see if we have questions before we move on.
We do. Before we get into those, though, can you just confirm the release date and due date one more time?
The EAR will release on June 15th of 2023, so in a little over a week, and it will be due by August 1st of 2023.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Alan Law. Ellen, you're now unmuted on our end. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, this is Ellen Law, recycling specialist with the County of San Diego. I just wanted to confirm on this section for the collection container systems. You said that we can report, I guess, as like an aggregate information. So if we have multiple haulers, for instance, you can kind of add up all of their information and report them, as you mentioned, under hauler 1, correct? I just want to make sure I had that right.
It depends. So if all of those haulers have the same collection container system, yes. So if they're all offering a 3 container collection system, yes, you can all aggregate those all into one row. If one of the haulers has a different system, the way you'd add that, so in this example we have so far, we have Cloverdale, 3 container collection system. And for this example, we'll say we'll have one hauler, which is Cloverdale, and we'll call them hauler 2. We'll just say that they have a 2 container collection system for both commercial and residential. So you'd list that particular hauler separately if they're offering a different collection system. So it wouldn't be that the generators are subscribed to different levels of service if you're still offering a 3 container collection system across your entire jurisdiction. it would be they have a just they're only offering like a gray and a blue or a gray and a green collection system. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Our next question comes from Mia Hoffman. Mia, you are now unmuted on our end. You could state your name and affiliation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Maya Hoffman from the city of Santa Maria. I just had a question about where I should report our permitted haulers or permitted roll-off haulers, because the city does our own commercial and residential hauling. And last year I reported them under the organic waste haulers section. Is that still where I should report them this year?
Yes, that is. You definitely want to report them there as well. And what Mia's talking about, I'll just scroll down to it, is we have this organic waste haulers grid that talks about the number of approved haulers and then the facilities they take that material to. So that's what she's referring to with the organic waste haulers grid. You know, since you are reporting on those collection systems here, you could add them. So since we have the additional functionality that, you know, in this particular case, they'd be commercial only. We do have this last box over here of other. If that's the way that those commercial businesses are subscribing to their service, you could select other and then say the number of generators that have that service.
Okay, so I could report them there, but I don't have to.
If that's the only way that they're providing that collection service and that's how they're compliant with 1383, yes, I would include them in this other column if they don't have a different collection container system service.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have a question from Tim Kruger. Tim, you're unmuted on our end.
Good morning, everyone. I was just asking Andrew for that new drop-down box about allowing organics in the gray container. When is that permitted? And if there is organics in the gray container in a 3 or 3+ system, does that gray container need to go to a high diversion waste processing facility?
Yes. Yes, in those situations, that gray container would need to go to a high diversion waste processing facility. So I think that the example that comes to mind, and I don't think they'll mind me sharing this, but San Jose allows organics to go into their gray container and they take that container for processing at a high diversion waste processing facility. That answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Looks like this is our last question for this section. Michelle Anna Kashishian, you're unmuted. Please state your name, affiliation. And
Hi, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nope, we're good.
Okay, hi, my name is Michelle Kashishian. I work with the City of Long Beach. And hi, Andrew. Just wanted to check under the compostable plastic and plastic bags allowed in green container collection facilities tab. There's a question there, that asks for the facility notices. So I just wanted to see, is that something that just is obtained one time or does it have to be obtained annually? That's my first question.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer, I think I'll answer your question, but I'll answer it slightly differently. So, and we'll just move on to that section 2 and talk about it, or that grid and talk about it as well. So hopefully I addressed your question. Let me know if I don't by the time I'm done here.
Okay.
So the grid she's talking about here is this compostable plastics and plastics allowed in green container and collection facilities grid. If we enter that form entry screen, you have a couple of questions of whether or not a facility has kind of provided that written notice to the jurisdiction that they allow for compostable plastics or they allow for organics to be in plastic bags. So that documentation would be part of your record keeping. It's not something you report on to us. The only thing you're reporting to us on is kind of the yes, no. So we'll say, and for this example, that it's yes, So you could choose to identify that facility in words in this box, or select the facility if it has an RDRS number, if that's easier. There's also a reference if you're not sure to be able to look it up if you want to use the RDRS number. And you just pick them and select them and move them over. And then there's a second question, organics allowed to be placed in plastic bags. We'll also say yes, which activates these fields. So you can provide an address here if you like, or select again, kind of that RDRS facility number. And then you click save. Oops, I didn't follow my own directions. I needed to pick at least one. So I click save, and then it saved. Oops, where did it go? Oh, yeah. So I guess just to point out, we already know this is a bug, but you can kind of see it kind of wiped everything out. So unfortunately, I can't complete that example. But if you do encounter this error, let us know. But hopefully we'll have this particular one addressed prior to that. So let's see, to come full circle on your question, you should have already received that written documentation that they do or do not, that they do allow for the compostable plastics or organics to be put in plastic bags. So you have the information you need in order to answer the questions in the electronic annual report. And I think the only time that would change is if the facility changes whether they do or do not allow that documentation. So you would just change your answer from yes to no in that particular case if they stopped allowing for those plastics. Does that answer your question?
In a sense, yes. So I know because of the April 1, 2021 implementation initial compliance report, it was required that we submitted the facilities and the notices. So I didn't know if this was specifically just for that or if it's something we had to do annually. I know that if there is a new facility, is it required to get a notice then for that facility as well?
If they are allowing for the compostable plastics or plastic bags, you should have record of that notice in your record keeping.
Okay. Okay, then yes, that answers my questions. But like you said, if I get it one time, the only time I need to change it is if that facility changes operations. Other than that, that one notice that we received is sufficient.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Andrew, do we have one more? Do we have time for one more collection system question?
Yes, of course. Yeah, this grid is really complicated, so I want to make sure it's really clear on what to report here.
Perfect. Our next question is from Christine Williamson then. Christine, you are unmuted on our end.
Hi, yes, I had a question. If there are generators that only have single containers where the container isn't going to a high diversion facility just because SB 1383 hasn't been rolled out yet, does it still get reported on or in the grid as a one container? Or do we actually only include that in the text box with the explanation?
Yeah, so to your point, if you are selecting two container or one container as your jurisdiction collection container system, the contents of those containers are required to go to a high diversion organic waste processing facility. So it sounds like in your scenario, what are all your other generators? What's your system? Is it 3 container?
It is planned 3 container system, yes, and we do have partial rollout. You know, we're under an NOIC and cap, but so you know, I can provide that explanation. I just wanted to make sure I'm reporting the right numbers in the right boxes, because you know, are we only supposed to report a number of containers for one container? Are we only supposed to report the generators that are going to a high diversion facility?
Yeah, if you select 1 or 2 containers in this grid, you're indicating to CalRecycle that the contents are going to high diversion. So I'm going to step here real quick. So I think this scenario kind of applies to you. Is you are offering a 3 container collection system, and it sounds like maybe you're waiting on containers or trucks or some reason. Oops.
Yeah,
I broke it.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
But
so yeah, you would say that you're offering a 3 container collection system, and then in that additional description box, provide kind of that narrative of the generators, the level of service that they have, and kind of expected rollout for that, fully implementing your 3 container collection system.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that we have in the Q&A pane.
Okay. Just move on. We're not quite done with this section. There's a few more grids here. So I think we already talked about the compostable plastics and plastic bags allowed in green container and walk through that one. There's no significant changes there. And this organic waste haulers grid, we did make a few changes here. And the most significant change is just right down here. Is that previously you were forced to select an RDRS facility number. So if your organics are going to a facility that does not have an RDRS facility number, you check this box in that red box and with the X, and then that will activate this cell. And then you can identify that facility that you're taking that your haulers are taking that material to. So that was the biggest change here based on user feedback. Just cancel out of that one. And then the last change we made is that we kind of pulled out these high diversion organic waste processing facilities into its own grid. So we added, this grid is brand new to this report. And so if you are using a high diversion organic waste processing facility, you identify it kind of down here. So you can say yes, no. If you say yes, you can kind of see it's grayed out. If I say yes, it activates and allows me to select an RDRS facility number. And so this one does require an RDRS numbered facility to be selected, at least one. If you want to select multiple, you can click and drag, or you can hold down control and kind of pick ones that you want and move them all over. And then hit save. And it will list them all out there. So you will have to answer this question whether you're using them or not. And so if you do not take your materials to a high diversion organic waste processing facility, you just say no, and then you're done. So you say save, and you're done with that question. Any other questions on collection systems?
We do. Let's see. Our next question is from David Biggio. David, you could state your name and affiliation. You're unmuted on our end and ask your question. For the sake of time, I'll go ahead and ask it then. David asks, can you give an example of a 3+ container system?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the easy, straightforward example, and let's go back up to the grid because it shows it in there, but would be a brown container that is for food waste only, in addition to a green container being just for yard waste, blue container for your kind of bottles and cans, paper and cardboard. So that would be one example of a 3+ container, sorry.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Deidre Dingman. Deidre, you're unmuted on our end. Please state your name and affiliation and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. This is Deidre Dingman from Contra Costa County. And I just wanted to clarify in the high diversion organic waste processing facility grid, when selecting, if we selected yes, and we have to pick an RDRS number, does it only list facilities that are permitted as high diversion organic waste processing, or does it list all facilities?
It lists all. This data table on the back end is referencing our entire RDRS kind of database. So you can do, I think you can go, see if I can do, I feel like you can do a control F, or maybe it's in here. See if I can do it. Yeah, so if you kind of just click in there and then type a number, if you know the number, it'll go to it to find it a little bit easier.
Thank you.
That's all that we have in the Q&A pane. Chris, is there anything in SLCP?
Nope.
Okay, keep going. All right, commercial programs. So in this top part, right, blue bar combined. So regardless of which law you have a diversion programs, select all materials that you're diverting from disposal. For commercial, your SRI programs, and actually let me activate this. This is a good example maybe to walk through this a little bit more detailed. I think there's a requirement to select at least one material, not necessarily from every category, but at least one material out of all categories. We did make a slight tweak here on additional materials because I think it said other materials, but just to make it clear, these are diverted materials as well, not just generated. And then down in the SRI program section, in the commercial and residential sections, it's most prominent. There's quite a few checkboxes, but you do need to select all of these checkboxes in order to complete the section. And again, you can click on the hyperlink and change the program details if you need, or if you want to provide just a brief, optionally provide a brief description about that particular SRI program, you can just type it directly in this box here. But you do need to select all of those programs here in order to complete that section. All right, and then we're down into the large venues reporting. And for this, I'm going to pass it over to Chris to talk about this section. Just give us just a moment. He's going to steal the screen share from me while we transition.
Sorry, too many screens. I'm getting reset here. All right. This screen. Okay. So this is the venues and events section. This is part of the old year, part of the new year. This is where you would report on events that meet the definition of a large venue and event. If you need more information, there are hyperlinks back to the web pages that go into more detail. I will show you how to copy an event. I'm not necessarily going to add a new one, but I'll show you the fields that would be in effect there. So first, you would want to press edit on the page, just like you would to do anything else on it. I will give a heads up that let's say you already went through and started doing some of these items and had put in notes and done whatever, sort of basically filled out the page and then go straight to this venue and event section. Just know when you're going to add a new one or copy a new previous year. I hope it would do it on most systems, but make sure you press save as you go through these pages, because that way, it's going to give an error if it's not all filled out. But the problem is if you don't press save when you do it, when you go to a new page, you may or may not get this pop-up saying, "Are you sure you want to go?" So I hope you save everything else before you say okay. Because at that point, when you go to the new page, this is where you will be able to copy information from the previous year. So in this case, going to go to 2021, going to copy over the Apple Fair, copy it to this year. So now this event has been copied over to this year. It maintains most of the information from the previous year, but there is still a requirement to fill in some specific information. All the previous info for the event, venue and event would be there. But on the practices tab, there are fields that you do need to update. You need to provide the extent of an implementation plan and provide disposal tons, and diversion tons. If you don't have them, you would need to at least enter 0. And once you press save on that, if you're copying event over, that is really the only thing you have to do. You can choose to update any of the generated or diverted material and or update the associated diversion programs. And now that we're back on this section, you'll see that there no longer says incomplete right above the plan implementation level because this information has all been entered. And to complete the rest of the page, as Andrew may have noted, at least on these diversion programs, you can check each of these boxes to carry over the previous year's information. If you want to add a new program note, you can. Once I have all the boxes checked and I press save, I have completed the section and gotten my green check mark with no error message. If you were not going to copy an event, there was a box on the screen that said no events, no event information or no discernible events. You can check that box and that would automatically update the section for you. But if you have previous venues and events, you can add them, you can copy them over, or if you need to add a new event, you can do that using the add new event button right here. Once again, it's going to ask me if I saved everything. I already have because I didn't change anything since the last save. And then you can go in and add in all the information for a new venue and event. Okay, so I believe that is the end of my section on this. Do we have any questions?
We have a few questions and a couple of reminders. The first of which is to please insert your questions into our Q&A pane. It helps us better manage and track the questions and our responses rather than the chat pane. And this is being recorded. It will be available probably within the next week. We have to go ahead and make it ADA compliant, after which it will be on the department's YouTube channel. So with that, our next question will give the opportunity to Carlos Chavez to go ahead and ask a couple of the questions that ended up in the chat pane, but we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask them before we get into this next question. Carlos? Okay, Carlos does not have a mic, so I'll go ahead and ask the first question. The collection systems tab seems to not, the collection system tab seems to only be for systems that are SB 1383 compliant. How should non-compliant systems report their activity? We started to briefly address this with Christine's question. So Carlos, if you could put in the chat if that answered the question, or if you have anything else to clarify, please submit it to the SLCP inbox. While we wait for that response, I'll go ahead and go to the next question. If we have food recovery conducted without contracts, does that still get reported, or should we omit the activity?
First, I want to check, is my screen showing again before I kind of show that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not seeing my normal green box. So in the edible food section, I believe there's guidance in the tooltip on what to report here. So let me just refer back to the question. So I'm assuming you're talking about the total pounds of edible food recovered. I would guide you to look at the regulatory text on edible food recovery requirements, because I believe in there, there should be contracts in place for that stuff. But in this box, you're reporting on the total pounds of edible food recovered that was reported by food recovery organizations and food recovery services located within the jurisdiction that contract with or have written agreements with commercial edible food generators. So there should be a contract between the food recovery organizations and food recovery services with the commercial edible food generators. And I think there should also be a form of a contract or kind of written agreement in some way between the food recovery organizations, food recovery services, and the jurisdiction with reporting this information to them. And you can look at the text there in 18994.2 for more information.
Carlos posted a follow-up question to that. So if no contract exists, do I omit all current food recovery activity?
If you don't currently have a contract, I would report it, and then in the additional description box, state kind of exactly what you're saying. You know, this portion is from edible food recovery services and organizations with the contract, and then this portion of the number is from those without contracts in place.
Thank you, Andrew. Our next question comes from Lisa Suello. Lisa, you are now unmuted on our end. Please state your name, affiliation, and you may ask your question.
I can answer her question without her stating it. So I believe you're referring to the SHRI programs, and the question is, there are no asterisks on the program description boxes in this section. Are program descriptions optional? And so for SHRI programs, yes, there is no requirement to provide additional information here. It's provided here for the convenience of jurisdictions to put information here if you'd like to do so.
Okay. Lisa stated that it is not allowing them to unmute, so go ahead and move on. If there's any other information you wanted to get clarification on, please go ahead and submit it to the SLCP inbox. We have another question from Carlos Chavez. Does the requirement to report on the top 10% mean that this only applies to jurisdictions that have 10 or more large events? For example, if we only have one large event and we report on that, it would mean that we are reporting on 100%, which isn't required, not the 10% mentioned in the regs.
Yeah, I can take that one, Chris. So this is more kind of referencing the opposite situation where if you had 100 large events, you only need to report on 10 of them. But if you only have one, then you should report on that one. That answer your question, Carlos?
We'll have to give Carlos a couple seconds to go ahead and.
Okay.
Looks like it did answer it. Thanks.
All right. Excellent. So we'll keep moving. Residential has the same build as commercial for the materials selected. So just select all materials that are diverted from disposal in your residential programs. The SHRI programs, again, I'm not going to do it this time, but you do have to check this box. And by checking that box, you're kind of confirming these bulleted items above, that all those program details are up to date and current and no changes are needed. And that additionally, if you'd like to provide additional information, you can type it in that box, which is activated when you click the check mark. And if you need to do more than 2,500 characters, make sure to click the hyperlink and enter it on the back side of the program details. And I guess just to note that I haven't pointed out yet that for special collection districts that provide solid waste services, you will not have the SHRI program section that we're talking about right now within your report. You only have the SLCP reporting requirements. Okay. Education and outreach. So this one, I think there's a little confusion, and so we'll spend a minute here. So this top grid or intention here, and hopefully this kind of helps. So it's mentioning SLCP, MCR, MORE, SHRI, and your HHWE education and outreach. And so the intention here was, regardless of which law you're educating about, you put all of that information into this grid for your jurisdiction. So if you do all of them because you do the different laws differently, you'd select all these boxes. And then the only SLCP requirement is to enter those number of generators that receive the SLCP material. If you want to just include all your generators here, you can do so, but just include that description below here. And then additionally describe those materials. So if you're doing print materials, you do brochures or cart tags or direct mailings, electronic through emails or text messages, or you have an app that you download for your generators to use, or whatever other education outreach systems you use to educate them on waste diversion, regardless of which law you're educating them about. I know one question we get asked quite often is on electronic, and how do we determine the number of generators that receive that, because it's a text message or it's just a web page or it's an app. So whatever metrics you may have on that, so maybe the number of recipients of that text message, the number of clicks you get on your web page, or the number of likes you get on maybe an Instagram or Facebook posting, you can include those numbers here if that's the only data you have, but just be sure to describe that, kind of give a little bit more additional information in this box below, right here, about what that number means in the electronic portion. And again, there's little tooltips here that should hopefully help provide some additional clarity. All right, we'll pause for questions in just a minute. So then we have the separate grid for commercial edible food generators, education and outreach. Has the same build as the other one, but this is just for commercial edible food generators, so SLCP specific information. But same functionality as what I just discussed, and same metrics to report as well, if that's how you did it. And just be sure to describe in the box right here of what you're doing for that education outreach to commercial edible food generators. And then again, SRE programs, just check the box. It's optional. If you've already described everything for your 5,000 program and the grid above, you do not need to provide the same information down below. It's just here optionally if you want to provide anything specific for this SRE program. All right, we'll pause for questions.
We do have a question from Mabel. Mabel, you are now unmuted on our end. If you could state your name and affiliation and ask your question regarding education pieces.
Hi, Mabel Aoyang, City of Palo Alto. We were just in the outreach education for, this is exactly where we are. So for SLCP and then the other ones. So I was wondering, when we did our route audit and lit flip at residential homes, we have left information for those that we found contamination in as the education. So do I include that detail in this portion also?
For that, yeah, for that particular example, it's going to be in the contamination inspections and complaints section. Just jump to it real quick. So this top grid, contamination monitoring for prohibited container contaminants. You're doing route reviews. And so you enter that number of route reviews here.
Right.
And then down here, and those number of notices, you put the number here, and then you could describe what that forms here. So that would, that one's kind of separate.
So number of notice violation or targeted education material. So that's exactly it. So if, let's say I left 20 tags for the 20 contaminated containers, those 20 would not count, or I don't have to also mention it in the previous screen we were just at.
No, even though those same generators are probably receiving positive education outreach messages as well, so they'd kind of be included already by default. Does that make sense? Like you're probably sending them a mailing about the programs that you offer, even though they got a targeted message as well. So the targeted message is just reported here, but they're most likely getting the other education outreach pieces as well.
Information. Okay, thank you.
We do have one other question, but they went ahead and said that they got their answer. But I think just for the sake of transparency, we'll go ahead and ask, are there any suggestions on what the other category in addition to electronic, direct, and print might cover?
Off the top of my head, no, I can't think of a particular example. A lot of times where you see this other, we just wanted to try to make these grids as flexible as possible depending upon what you may do. So I know this grid has one, and then the collection systems grid also has one. And it's just really to make it more as customized as we possibly can for whatever scenario you may have.
That's all that we have in the Q&A pane for now.
Okay. All right. Moving along. So the Imwello and CalGrain sections. There's no significant changes here, and I'll just walk through what these say because I think the tooltip really provides the information. So the activities you report here are those included where the project has been completed and or the necessary information is available to determine compliance with Imwello requirements. So if you don't have any activities completed in that reporting period, then you just enter 0. And then the same goes for the CalGrain grid. It's just kind of on a jurisdiction basis, whenever you can determine that compliance, whatever mechanism you have in place for that determination, that's what you report here. So even if you had a project that maybe started in 2022, but it's not completed yet, and you can't determine compliance, you wouldn't include that number. You wouldn't report on them here, only when you can kind of make that final determination of compliance. We do have this one SHRI program here. I just want to note that it made the most sense to us to put it with your C&D. So you do have to check this box in this section in order to complete the section. And then C&D specific materials are listed here. So you can just check all that apply that you're diverting from disposal. And then SHRI programs down here is kind of our catch-all for anything that doesn't belong in a different section. And again, only the ones that you have selected for your jurisdiction will populate here, but you have to check the box on all of these to complete the section. And I'm just going to keep moving along. We'll pause for questions in a minute. Household hazardous waste is SHRI programs only. So in this section, you have to check the box, make sure those program details are current and up to date, and you can provide additional description on that program and your activities with that program in these boxes. All right, now pause for questions before we pass it back to Chris to talk about disposal.
Nothing yet, Andrew.
Okay. Well, I'm going to pass it back to Chris, and he's going to walk you through the disposal rate calculation and calculation factors section. And give us just a minute while we transition.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute before I switched screens. And then I was like, where'd my button go? Okay, disposal rate calculations. So another section that's not new to SB 1383. This is related to AB 939 and SB 1016 and the disposal of an annual calculation rate or disposal calculation rate. The calculator is only going to be on jurisdictions that are cities, counties, regional agencies, or designated reporting entities. Special districts that provide solid waste services will not have to complete this section because they are not given an annual per capita rate. The data for this calculator comes straight from the recycling and disposal reporting system. The data that you see here is just as of a few days ago. The official data will be downloaded the evening before the year and will be current up through changes made in the RDRS through close of business June 13th. After the calculator is first visited by a jurisdiction, that's when the data will load. So if you go in on June 15th, that's the bit of data you will get. It's going to be the same any day after that. So once it's in there, it's there. It is going to be locked to June 13. And if you have any changes you would like to have made prior to the year, please have facilities update the information in RDRS prior to close of business June 13th. To make changes to the disposal rate calculator, you would press edit, just like on any other page, and there are various types of credits that are available. You'll notice that disaster waste and class 2 waste are grayed out here and cannot be edited because due to the start of RDRS reporting, these are now designated as specific outflows and are not and should not be included as part of regular disposal. Other credits that are available are related to medical waste tons, regional diversion facilities, C&D waste outside of the jurisdiction's control, i.e. done by another governmental agency, and out-of-state tons that were diverted and or other disposal amount tons, which are all specifically outlined and detailed in the report year disposal modification certification sheet, which you will need to complete if you are going to make any changes to the calculator itself and or claim a disposal credit. To adjust for a misallocation or misreporting that was not corrected in RDRS prior to the opening of the year, you would make any of those changes on this line and or claim your credits. Just going to put in some example numbers here. They're not claiming the transformation for diversion, and I'm going to press save. And it now updated that whole calculator section, and any field that you changed should be yellowed out to indicate that it was changed by you, and you're going to submit a disposal modification sheet to go along with that when you submit your annual report. If you would like to set anything back to the default to not make it look like anything was changed, at the bottom of the calculator, while you're in the edit screen, you can press reset to default and it'll change everything back to normal, and it will not prompt you to complete a form when you turn in your annual report. At the bottom of the calculator, you see your yearly per capita rates, your target, and your transformation rate, if you have any, and how your final annual target or your final annual calculation compares to your annual target each year. This page is then directly tied to the next page called calculation factors. And on this page, you have the option to discuss any extenuating circumstances related to your disposal rate. It will also prompt you to, if there were changes made to the calculator, one or two of the first boxes will be checked. And if there was any green waste reported or any green material ADC reported on your behalf, you will be required to fill in at least question 1 to describe your plans to divert green material uses ADC. And if you are not meeting your annual per capita target, you will be prompted possibly to answer the next couple questions. If you think that the ADC was misapplied to your jurisdiction, there is a box to check that says you are getting the tons adjusted, and because they may be misallocated. If that's something you were handling through the RDRS section, you can check that box and or describe your situation right here. Number one, saying this was misallocated to us. We don't use ADC. We are working with RDRS to get it slotted to the correct jurisdiction of origin, or whatever that process may be that you are currently going through. Oh, see, I didn't leave a description on box one. Told me I was being bad. There we go. And so I've answered the required sections and it's given me a green check. And I don't think we're necessarily going to move on quite yet because we're going to take questions.
Yes, we are. The first of which is from Ellen Law. Ellen, can you go ahead and state your name and remind everybody of your affiliation and ask your question?
Hi. Yes, this is Ellen Law, County of San Diego. On the disposal rate calculation tab, I wanted to confirm for the green material potential beneficial reuse exported line item, if we want to claim that as diversion credit, just to confirm, we should submit a disposal mod form for those tons, correct?
Yes, and once again, I'll point out all sorts of things on this page. Just have tooltips, and that is a good question. You would want to submit that because since these materials are not, or since a lot of these out-of-state facilities are not in RDRS, we don't know whether that green material was actually used beneficially as ADC or some kind of other erosion control. So in that case, it's automatically going to be counted as disposal. In which case, if you can prove, no, it's ADC, it's this, or whatever documentation you'd be able to come up with to say, no, it should not be disposal, it was diverted. That's where you would submit a form along with that, and you would be able to have that marked off. And sorry, I kept saying ADC, but it's really only for the erosion control, because green material ADC would still be considered disposal due to AB 1594, which started counting green material as being disposal a few years ago, or green material ADC being disposal a few years ago.
Ellen, would you like to go ahead and ask your follow-up question?
Yes, sorry, thank you. So are you able to speak to what kind of documentation? Or I can also ask my land rep if you think that's better.
I mean, weight tickets or a signed report or something from the facility.
Okay.
I writing it on a napkin, happy face with it was diverted. I don't think that's going to cut it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, proper, something that's, verifiable, something that's, kind of proves like, yeah, this actually was diverted as erosion control at an out-of-state facility.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we have Maya Hoffman. Maya, you're unmuted on our end. Go to state your name, affiliation, and question.
Hi again. It's Maya Hoffman with the City of Santa Maria. I have a question about if now that some line items are clarified and expanded upon in the EAR compared to last year, I'm realizing, with the hauling question and with the outreach, that I might need to report things differently than I did last year. And because of that, there might be like a difference in data that might, I don't know, show up as a red flag to you guys. Is there a place in there that I can, or that I should clarify those changes, or just in the description box? Is that what you would recommend?
Is you talking about collection systems?
Yeah, for the roll-offs, and then for the outreach last year, we reported all of the generators that received all of the outreach for all of the programs and not just the 1383 programs.
Okay, I'll start with collection systems. So yes, that's kind of why we put these additional description boxes in here, is so that you can explain anything and everything that you need to explain about differences. And we, I guess just as a precursor to this conversation, we understand that we did a massive overhaul on our report prior to last year's cycle, and there's going to be a learning curve with getting everyone adjusted to that new system. So we have that filter as we review this cycle as well, kind of going into it. Everyone's kind of learning how to report in this new structure. So for collection systems, yes, put that kind of why there might be differences from last year to this year in this box here, right, in this additional description box.
Okay.
And then education and outreach, can you state that question again about what you did?
Yeah, for the number of generators, I believe, I guess I can look at my EAR from last year, but I put in the total number of generators that received all of the different types of outreach, and then in the description box I just outlined, which numbers received each ones. So I'm just not sure if you guys are gonna, I just want to make sure that if the numbers look really different, that you're not going to be alarmed.
No, no, it sounds like you did exactly what you needed to do and just kind of describe
Okay.
your reported. The reason why we specify the number of generators that receive the SLCP material here is because that was a regulatory requirement with 1383, whereas previous laws, so AB 939 or your SHRI, HHWE, MCR more don't have that really specific requirement. So that's why we're specifically saying SLCP material, but there's nothing kind of wrong with putting a total number here and then explaining the breakdown in the description box below.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions in the Q&A pane. Have we gotten anything in SLCP? Correction, we just got another one. This question is from Stephen Moreno. Stephen, we're unmuting you on our end. If you could go ahead and state your name, affiliation, and ask your question. We'll go ahead and get started. Okay, Stephen, it looks like you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Okay, mic's not working. I'll go ahead and ask that for you, Stephen. If a jurisdiction had an NOIC and did not implement in 2022, would anything need to be entered for collection system, education, or any other SLCP section by August 1st?
Yeah, give me just a second. I'm going to read your question here. So in the collection system, you want to state the collection system that you currently have. And then in that additional description box, kind of explain, we're currently on a NOINC. This is what our collection system will be, but this is what we currently have. And then same kind of goes for education and outreach, since those are, you're probably asking about both of those because they're related depending upon the change to your collection system. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have about 30 minutes left. We are kind of about done. I think we'll have some time at the end to ask questions or as we go here. Okay, so we are moving on to the waivers and exemptions section. So this department issued waivers section. This really only applies in these two scenarios here, the low population or rural exemption. This is not asking about what you as a jurisdiction have issued as far as de minimis or physical space waivers are concerned. And so if you do have a rural exemption or low population waiver, I'll just open up the form screen. So you can check the box here, or and then you enter those number of, for low population, or I'm sorry, enter the number of generators that are waived from the requirement to subscribe to an organic waste collection service based upon those waivers. The other numbers are for emergency processing facility or operation operation failure waivers was in effect. So at kind of a local level, if you had an emergency waiver, and then the tons that were disposed as a result of those waivers. You don't have to enter the tons disposed as a result of having a rural exemption or low population waiver. The jurisdiction issued waivers. This is where you enter your number of de minimis waivers issued to commercial businesses and the number of physical space waivers that were issued to generators for that the jurisdiction gave out to generators from the requirement to subscribe to some or all of those organic collection services. We do still have split out, and this is where kind of I know it's a little redundant to say more exemptions more, but we were just trying to be consistent with the kind of the new build to identify that gray bar and what law it's referring to. We do still have the more exemptions in here for most cases where a low population waiver is in effect for certain census tracts. So the census tracts that are waived from organic collection services under 1383 are still required to follow the mandatory organics commercial recycling law. So if there's exemptions that are not captured by kind of the overarching jurisdiction issued waivers through SLCP, you'd report those waivers here. And if and it is a required field, so if you're not issuing any, you just enter 0 into the field, and your rationale can say, waivers included with SLCP or whatever your situation may be here. But you do need to put an entry in both of those are not applicable if it doesn't apply to you in this rationale. I'm going to go one more section and then we'll pause for questions. All right, so the contamination monitoring for prohibited container contaminants. I think the main change that we made here is we just added an additional description box, which is optional. So you can provide additional information depending upon your selection. You can select one or both, and you can kind of see that depending upon your selection, the different fields are activated. So for route reviews, that's a required field and that's a required field. And for waste evaluations, these 3 are required fields. You can also select both, and there's tooltips here, which should help provide additional clarity for you on what these are asking. All right, so inspections, just report on number of edible food generators. For tier 1 and tier 2, noting that it is still a required field here. So for tier 2 specifically, since those aren't starting until 2024, you just enter a 0 here. If you like, you can put that in the additional description for why you're entering a 0 there. Complaints. I'm getting ahead of myself. So inspections and complaints are reported here as well. And these complaints are not so much you're getting complaints from generators that their rates are higher or that their neighbor's trash smells bad, but more along the lines of kind of the whistleblower type complaints of not having a blue bin at a multifamily complex or not having a green bin, those types of complaints. Any questions before we move along?
We do. Sherry Metz, you're now unmuted on our end. You could go ahead and unmute yourself.
City of Tulare. We offer a 3-can system. Currently, we have brown, blue, and green. We're switching to gray. On the collection tab, would we still be able to name all of them because they are 3 cans, even though the brown has not been converted over to a gray?
Yeah, and you're just waiting on being able to order containers or
That's
something
correct.
along those lines.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yes, so enter 3 container for the collection system that you offer for residential and commercial. And then in that additional description, you want to just provide that additional detail of, gray is current, our trash is currently collected in the brown, just waiting on our gray containers to come in, and then those will be switched out to gray.
All right, thank you.
That's all we have for now.
Okay. All right, enforcement and monitoring. So here in the SLCP grid, there could be a lot of overlap between and I'll use my tool here, SLCP and the more grid, since SLCP is more stringent requirements, but they're very similar as well. So in these grids, what it's referring to in this compliance review is kind of a desk audit. So not necessarily you're going and visiting them physically, but just looking at a spreadsheet of the accounts and ensuring that those commercial businesses that generate 2 cubic yards or more per week of solid waste, and just kind of as a couple reminders as we get to this section, is that commercial businesses does include multifamily, and the definition of multifamily being identified as a commercial business is if there's 5 or more units in a complex, whereas if there's 4 or less, it would be considered residential. And that compliance review referring to the desk audit. So kind of evaluating that spreadsheet and ensuring any generator that has the 2+ cubic yards of solid waste generation, so meaning trash, recycling, and organics collection all combined collectively per week. They report on those number of commercial businesses that are included in that review, and then the numbers that are not recycling or organics in that review. And you can provide that additional description if there's more information you'd like to provide there. If all of your generators are captured in the SLCP grid above, you can report the same numbers here and just say in this monitoring from those not recycling about more, either not applicable in the additional description, say see SLCP grid above for additional information if it's going to be the same information there. And there is the functionality in this grid if you do have that 1826 rural exemption waiver to check that box, and you will not be required to fill out these fields. MCR has a slightly different threshold. But again, there's probably a lot of overlap here with SLCP, since the cardboard and paper organics, which probably go in the blue bin, can fall under that SLCP definition. So if these are included in your SLCP reviews, include those same numbers and describe that. That's what you did when you're reporting this information here. All right. These bottom grids are fairly straightforward. Just enter the notice of violations for generators or edible food generators or food recovery organizations. Then it kind of steps through the enforcement process. So if it's not implemented yet or doesn't start until 2024, just enter zeros, and you can provide why there's zeros in that additional description box for that additional information. The penalty orders is kind of the next step of enforcement, and then as those enforcement actions are resolved for those same fields. Any questions?
We just had one come in from Rachel Ballsy. Before we get to Rachel, just a quick reminder that we are also receiving questions from the SLCP inbox. That's slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. If you don't have a mic or would prefer to get your response in writing, please go ahead and submit your questions there. Rachel, you are now unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and state your name, remind everybody of your affiliation, and ask your question.
Thanks, Rachel Balsley at Stop Waste, supporting Alameda County jurisdictions. My question was around the SLCP data. It says not recycling organics, but I know the regs define organics very broadly to include cardboard and paper. So the numbers of those not recycling, say there's businesses that have organic service but do not have the blue bin of recycling, would those businesses also be included in that number that is not recycling organics? Or would it be more of those that don't have just the organics bin?
Yeah, so I think it depends is how I'll start the answer to this question, because each jurisdiction is going to be different on what materials they allow where. So if they don't have a blue bin because cardboard and paper can go into the green bin, and they self-haul bottles and cans and then have a waiver in place for a blue bin, then they are technically compliant. They're diverting all organics as they should be. Does that scenario kind of help answer the question?
A little bit, but what about the cases where, you know, all of our jurisdictions are 3 container collection systems. They did not get a waiver for traditional recycling, but they have organic service.
Well, it sounds like they're not recycling paper and cardboard in that scenario.
Yes.
Then you would include them as not recycling organics.
Okay, and then would that be a difference in the 1826 or more numbers? Because I think that was more traditionally defined as just organic service.
Potentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else in the Q&A pane. We do have some items in the chat, just to remind everybody that the recording will be available on the department YouTube channel. So if you go ahead and access YouTube and into the search bar CalRecycle, we should be the first link that pops up. Select videos, and it will be in that catalog.
Yeah, and we typically release listserv messages once we've done the ADA processing on those of how to find them either on YouTube, or additionally, we'll post some links within our own web pages of where you can access those YouTube recordings as well. Okay. Facilities is just all SHRE programs. So again, in this section, you just have to check the box, verify that those program details are current, go to those program details if you need to, optionally describe the program in the text box. You just need to check all the boxes here. Infrastructure and barriers question, pretty straightforward. If anything's changed, yes or no, and if yes, describe in that box what's changed. All right, ordinances or enforceable mechanisms. We did previously add some language talking about kind of SHRE ordinances or enforceable mechanisms. Remove that language because it was causing some confusion. So the focus here is just on those SOCP related ordinance or enforceable mechanism changes. The contact changes, we're still working on some changes here, which will hopefully make it easier for you to identify if you need to make changes here. So you have kind of a reference of who the contacts you have identified already as the SLC primary or official, but our developers haven't quite finished those changes. Hopefully we'll be able to show that on June 15th, which is the next year webinar that we'll hold, and show how that works, or what should be populating there, just to hopefully make it a little bit easier for you to identify if you need to update those changes here. The ordinances enforceable mechanisms section, we did move all the ones that are required for SOCP up towards the top, just so you don't have to dig through the entire list, and then also put SOCP required next to them. But in this section, you want to check all the ordinances that may apply to your jurisdiction. I think for some jurisdictions, none of them may apply, so this section overall is optional. But if you are required to have these ordinances, I would recommend at a minimum checking the ones that are required. And then SHRE programs, if there's any additional SHRE programs down here. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Check the box to make sure your program details for program code 6020 of your street programs for ordinances are up to date and current. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Chris to close us out. And then looks like we might have maybe a little bit of time, 10 minutes or so by the time he's done to answer any remaining questions. So just give us just a moment while Chris takes the screen from me, and then he'll close us out.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so the last couple screens here, once again, this is some old information for those of you who've been doing it for a while. For those of you who are new, you are not going to have to do a lot on either of these screens, I don't think, but we are going to go over them anyway because there are some required fields. Edit. Okay, so planning documents, this section, this is not necessarily related to any recent ordinances or anything else you may have drafted and put together that would be addressed on the previous screen. These are specific to original planning documents related to the implementation of AB 939. If you are a jurisdiction with a rural petition, there's only about 7 or 8 of you. This is unrelated to rural waivers or anything else. This is specific to jurisdictions that received reduced diversion and disposal targets related to the disposal calculations. If you should know who you are. If you don't, you can find it on the web page, which is linked here. But most of you are going to click no. Newly incorporated cities. I mean, ideally, we're going to know that. If you have an idea of something that may be coming up soon, it'd be great to get a heads up. These don't happen very often, but sometimes it does, and this would affect calculations and allotments for unincorporated counties, new cities, and/or regional agencies. Planning documents assessment. This is where the fun starts. The first one is for resource reduction recycling element. 99.9% of you are going to need to click no on this. You do not need to revise your SHRI very often, if at all. You are updating your SHRI annually by submitting this report, and we'll show that where those programs are located on the next page. Throughout each of the previous tabs of the annual report, any point there was a thing that mentions a program name, and you check the box, and we were asked, oh, are the notes required there? No, they're not required. If you have an update, you can put them in. I'll show you the details screen after this one. But anytime you make an update or acknowledge, no, this program continues, you are updating your SHRI each year. So there's no reason to necessarily revise it. There's a whole planning process and city council meetings and who knows what else you'd have to do, let alone our public approval process. So generally, you are not going to need to revise your SHRI documents. Same goes for your HHWE, your household hazardous waste element. Those are programs specific in the year. We'll show that on the next screen. So generally 99.9% of you will not need to revise your HHWE. Now the NDFE. This is an interesting one in which, yes, you may have to update your NDFE document. This used to be a public approval process. It was streamlined a number of years ago, but if there are any non-disposal facilities that are going to need a new one, that need to be planned, you will need to update your non-disposal facility element by sending us an email with the attachment to the, or what can be an attachment to the original document, or if you want to send the whole thing, you can do that too. Before the facility permit can be issued, it needs to be identified in the NDFE of either your jurisdiction or the county. And let's say you're using a thing that's out of your jurisdiction, you don't necessarily have to identify all the facilities outside of your boundaries. But if there's something being cited there that you're or someone else is going to need to use, it does need to be, your NDFE does need to be updated before that facility can be permitted. Summary plan assessment. This is not something you are necessarily going to need to update. This is kind of a overall bit of the original planning documents. It provides an overview of waste management infrastructure for the county incorporated cities, includes demographic data and coordinating countywide diversion programs. It's really just a summary of the SHRI, WHI, and NDFE, so there's really never any reason to have that revised. Areas of concern or conditional approvals. Once again, this is left over to the original planning document approvals. You can always look in an old year to see what previous answers were, but most of you are going to need to say no to this. Same thing with conditional approvals and the siting element assessment. This is one where you will have to put something in there if you are a county or a regional agency. Individual jurisdictions are not going to have to report on this. And actually this entire section, if you're a special district that provides solid waste collection services, you won't even have this tab. But on this specific question, you need to put in the years, the estimated number of years you would have disposal capacity for. So ideally you need to have at least 15. If you have any less, you would describe that down here. I'm just going to put in 30 for Sonoma, move along. As needed. And if you didn't have additional, if you didn't have enough capacity, and this is specific to disposal, nothing to do with organics recycling, so it's disposal capacity. If you didn't have 15, you would need to put some extra information as to how you would obtain additional capacity for disposal. Otherwise, you would enter no and press save. Oh, what did I not answer? Question 3. Oh. I don't think that used to be a required field. Maybe something's up. Anyway, let me go along. Next up, the additional information and report management section. So for those of you who've done annual reports prior to last year, the SHRI and WHI programs used to be more heavily emphasized. You still have the ability to go into these individual programs and update the existing information. Is it thinking for me? These are still all, most of these would have been updated as you went through the other tabs and or checked a box. So on each of those tabs, you would have gone through and basically made the updates, and you could have added a note if you want, either from those tabs if you click the hyperlink, or from that final tab, you can come in and still get detailed information for the programs and or change some of the existing stuff. So for instance, if you want to press edit, most of these upper fields, there's no need to change the program years, the start year. That really the only reason you'd have to come in here, aside from providing a note that's longer than what you can do on the other tabs, is if you were going to drop the program. If you were going to drop it, you would have to put in a reason right here. And press save. Oh, I forgot to pick the reason. Insufficient funding. Yeah. Okay. So that's the detail for the additional information. And because I was updating a residential program, it sent me back to that section. So this is a spot where you would be able to update any additional detailed info for diversion programs. And whether you're going to do that or not, there is an additional final set of boxes here where you can basically freeform, say anything you want that you weren't able to put in any previous screen. That would be this first box. And then this extra box is if you want to upload any additional documentation, such as outreach, an extra, like I said, an extra NDFE description. There's free form to update whatever you want through that document management button. Once you have all your sections complete, you would go to the submit confirmation tab. From here, if you want a copy of your report summary, I'm going to press this, but I think it's going to take a while, so I don't know if I'm necessarily going to wait for this PDF to load. Oh, look at that. That was super quick. So here's where you can get a copy of your report summary with everything you've put in. You can get this whether you're ready to submit or not. Like, let's say you need to get a copy of this and give it to your supervisor or something so they can check before you press submit. That's where you would be able to do that. Yeah. And yeah. The boxes in the way. And because this report is not complete, I am going to go back to a existing report to show you where that button will show up after all the sections are complete. So there's a report summary at the bottom. And once all the boxes are checked off in green, the submit annual report will be at the bottom of the page right here. Just press it once. It might take a minute to process. You should see your browser spinning or something. Just try not to double clutch on it or wait if it is processing, because you might end up submitting 2 reports and then we're going to have a data issue. So it's a lot of information to load and go. So if it's taking a minute, please just give it time to think. Once you press submit, you're going to get this box to say, are you sure? Because once it's in, you would press OK. It'll think, and then you'll get an information or a notice saying it was submitted. And then after that, all these sections are going to be locked down and you can no longer edit it. So please make sure you are 100% ready and committed to turn that report in when you press the submit button.
Thanks, Chris. Can you go back to additional information report management real fast? On the 2022.
I'm going to go back to the one we were already doing. Yeah.
Just something I want to note for everyone is on the additional information and report management tab. While you have all your SRE programs listed here, you still have to go through each section of the report and check the boxes. You cannot just come to this back end and look at the program details from that table and to complete the report. I just want to point that out, that you do still have to go through each section and check those boxes next to each SRE program. If SRE programs apply for your jurisdiction, that program details are up to date and accurate. Right, Chris is kind of showing there on the screen. All right, thanks, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have a couple minutes left. Do we have any questions that we can answer before we wrap up?
We do. If we do not get to your question, though, please remember to go ahead and submit it to our SLCP inbox. Carlos, who has already indicated that they do not have access to a mic, asked a question regarding the NDFE section. If we modify our transfer station to accept source separated organic waste and use the existing permit, do you want to be told about that here, or does using the existing permit mean that it does not need to be reported?
I don't know 100% for sure, so I'm not going to directly answer that. Yeah, I think I would suggest talking to your LEA and or one of our CalRecycle permitting staff, because yeah, if it's only a transfer facility, yes, it is permitted. If it wasn't doing any diversion before, does it need to be? I mean, I guess if it's just a transfer station, is it being disposed on site? I guess, yeah, that one's a little tricky. So I would suggest talking to your local enforcement agency and or one of our CalRecycle permitting staff people.
Thanks, Chris. Next up, we have Maya Hoffman. Maya, you're unmuted on our end. Go ahead and ask your question.
Is there a way to download all of the tabs all at once this year? Because I know last year we had to download them each individually and it sent us in, or it gave only Excel spreadsheets. Is there a way to download it as a Word document all at once, or all at once as Excel?
No, unfortunately, we haven't been able to build in that level of functionality yet, because from our end, just because of all the different versions of reports, it's just it takes a lot of development time. It's still on our list of things to do, but we will not be able to complete it prior to June 15th. But we are still working on towards providing that. I don't know if it's going to be Word. I think maybe at a minimum it'll be Excel. So we are working to try to find something that jurisdictions can use, but we don't have anything yet.
We are at the top of the hour. Do you want to keep going through some of the final questions, or should we wrap up?
I think let's try to answer them real quick. I don't think it'll take too long.
Okay, Deidre Dingman, you are up. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. This is Deidre Dingman, Contra Costa County. If we want to see if we need to add a SRI or HUI program, because it's been a long time since I've looked at the full list. Oh, right there. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect.
I actually had the question box open and saw that. I was like, oh, I know where we can do this. So if you go to the add button on that final tab, it should show you all the programs that you have not added yet. So you'll have a limited list here. So in this case, like for Sonoma, these are the programs they have not selected at any point.
Thank you both. Kimberly Nilsson. Kimberly, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and ask your question regarding the mini outreach items.
Good afternoon. I'm Kimberly Nilsson, the owner of Solid Waste Solutions. I was just wondering, in the document report management section, how much information do you want us to upload? We keep all the outreach, the letters, the tracking, the Excel spreadsheets. Do you want that uploaded, or do you just want that available to CalRecycle if it's needed?
And most of that documentation will just be part of your implementation record. So if you think that it's going to really support something you're saying or ease a lot of confusion or make something more clear about what you're reporting in electronic report, I would upload it and reference it where it applies. But in general, no, we do not need all of your implementation, or do not want your implementation record uploaded in the electronic annual report.
Great, thank you.
Our final question comes from Eddie Castellanos. Was the date submitted fixed in the jurisdiction summary PDF export? I believe last year when the report was exported, it showed Jan 1, 0001 or something similar.
Well, it's the first time I've heard of that bug, so we'll definitely note it because we still do need to make updates to the PDF summary to reflect the kind of new changes that we went over today. So I will make sure that we add that to the list of things we address.
And I popped it on the screen for an unsubmitted report. It's definitely going to show that because, well, we haven't submitted this report yet. So it's kind of like a conflict. Like it's looking for that information, but it can't find it. But because it's kind of a standardized PDF template, it's got to put in something. We can double check on these submitted ones that it's working correctly, but I do know that definitely on an unsubmitted report, that's kind of just a piece of placeholder info, just to, it's got to put something in there.
Thanks, Chris. All right, I think that's all of our questions. So just as in closing, we are going to do another webinar that's the exact same format that we did today on June 15th. So I think that was in the same listserv message that went out with this webinar. So if more questions come to mind, or if you want to watch it again, you can tune into that webinar. And we'll also post these videos on our YouTube channel and most likely have links on our webpage as well to those. And we'll also send out a listserv message when those are available for viewing. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you can also send them to the slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov email address, and we'll have the appropriate contact follow up with you there. Thank you so much for attending, and we will see you next week.